Sir David Crausby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was actively involved in the Get Britain Out campaign in the referendum in 1975. I was on the wrong side of that referendum when I voted to leave, and I was on the wrong side of the next one, 41 years later, when I voted to remain. In the meantime, the British people changed their minds in one direction, and I changed my mind in the other. Although I think what also happened was that mainstream politics and much of the media changed its mind as well as the common market evolved into the European Union. Many Conservatives who supported the common market in the 1970s, which many in Labour saw as a big businessman's club, started to get nervous when the European Union began to deliver properly workers' rights, whilst at the same time the Labour movement and the trade unions came round to the view that there were advantages in cross-European standards, equal pay, decent working conditions, and most importantly, good standards of health and safety. The two referendums in 1975 and 2016 have much in common. Ted Heath, the then Prime Minister, had taken us into the common market in 1972 without a people's vote, so Harold Wilson promised a referendum after he delivered renegotiated terms. The British people went for it, and Harold won the 1974 election, and he consequently won the referendum to remain. Fast forward to 2015, and David Cameron, who was becoming terrified of the threat posed by Nigel Farage and UKIP, must have looked back in history and thought it would be a good idea to imitate Harold Wilson by promising a referendum in the forthcoming election. And to be fair, David Cameron was successful in that his policy secured a Conservative majority for the first time since 1992. The first part of his cunning plan worked, but the difference was it all went wrong for Mr Cameron because he was no Harold Wilson, in that he was completely unable to persuade the British people to do what was in Britain's best interest. So when critics talk about no second referendum, the fact is we've already had two. And in advance of the second vote in 2016, those who wanted to leave the EU claimed that the public didn't understand the consequences of the common market when we first voted in 1975. So they, as was their right, argued for another referendum. Now, the same group who want to leave argue that another referendum, a third one, would be an insult to those who voted 2 years ago, because it would be tantamount to saying that those who voted to leave didn't know what they were doing. The truth is that nobody knew what they were doing in 2016, if indeed they did in 1975. And only a few anoraks, mainly in this place, actually thought that they knew what they were doing. And some of them, I have to say, unfortunately, scurrily, still think that they know what they're doing. Now, if there's been a mistake in this sad saga, it is that we should never have had either referendum in the first place. And that is nobody's fault, but the fault of us politicians. We are responsible for this self-inflicted chaos, not the electorate. And we have a duty to resolve it. And if I've learned anything from all of this, it is that yes, no, referendums are not the right way, not even the honest way, to make complex policy in the interest of our country. They are being deviously misused by politicians to win general elections. The promise of a 1975 referendum won the election for Labour, just as the proposed 2016 referendum won the election for the Tories. What we should honourably do in the future is make it clear in our manifestos as to what we stand for and then put it to the public in a general election. I reluctantly have to say that Ted Heath was right in 1970 when he contained in the Conservative manifesto that he would negotiate to take us into the common market and do so. That is what we should resolve to do in the future. So where do we go from here? Well, in crisis, we should stay calm and do the sensible thing, not the emotional thing. When in a hole, stop digging. As we stand, we have clear choices. No deal Brexit, the Prime Minister's no point Brexit, or no Brexit at all. Now, the choices may well look unpleasant and humiliating, but this is where we are as a country. For my part, I am not a fan of our present-day European Union and its institutions, and there is much that we should change. The common agricultural policy is a disgrace. Our fishing communities are treated unfairly. The free movement of labour was introduced too quickly, without thought or consideration for low-paid workers. And as for the unelected bureaucrats and their unaccountable budgets, they drive me crazy. But to leave in panic with the Prime Minister's proposed deal, whilst remaining under the yoke of the unelected control of foreign powers, is madness. It would be a betrayal, and it in no way honours the will of the British people, even in what was a flawed referendum vote in the first place. We would be better to stay in the European Union and give the rest of them hell, particularly the unelected bureaucrats. And to stay where we are is my conclusion, Mr. Speaker, to this humiliatingly unsolvable problem. Because the fact is that what was proposed in the first place by the Leave campaign in 2016 is not and never was deliverable. We just have to accept in life that there are some things that you can't do. For my part, I always wanted to score the winning goal in a World Cup final in the last minute for England at Wembley after extra time. But I've come round reluctantly, although maybe not, reluctantly to the view that it's not going to happen. Likewise, to be the first nation to leave the EU in opposition to 27 other countries and get a good deal for Britain at the same time was always, to say the very least, naive. Now, some say that the Prime Minister has done her very best and she deserves a measure of sympathy. Sorry, but I have none, because my concern lies with the fate of the British people who've been led by this government, her government, into extremely dangerous waters. The fact is that the Prime Minister has been centrally involved in this circus all the way through, from the point where David Cameron and his ministers opportunistically started the process. So the Prime Minister should go back to Brussels and make it clear that we will not be bullied. We should leave, if we must, in our own time and on our own terms. And if we need to take up the option to delay or revoke Article 50, then of course we should do that. We should do that, whatever is in the interests of the British people. And if that creates uncertainty for our markets and an embarrassment for the government, then so be it. My dad, Mr. Speaker, didn't fight his way through the Second World War to be humiliated, and I will not be voting for this cap-in-hand deal or any other remotely like it.